Welcome to episode 66 of Book Nerd Paradise, where we get to know an author as they tell us one of their favorite quotes, read from their work, pose a trivia question, and give away a book or two. Hi, I'm LRW Lee, author of the Andy Smithson Epic Fantasy Adventure series. And today I thought I would share another portion from book 6, which I am currently writing. It's called Wisdom of the Centaur's Reason, and it should be out in the winter 2017 if I continue on the pace that I am currently writing. So the snippet that I just wrote today goes like this. Andy inched up the bank far enough to insert his hands between two planks of the service bridge near shore, then let his feet swing. The momentum propelled him forward, and he grabbed the next plank, adding several splinters in the process. Blocking out the pain, he added his other hand before reaching for the next board. Halfway across the 20-foot span, his mind started playing tricks as it harped on past failures falling off the monkey bars when he was little. Andy imagined the water roiled more vigorously beneath him. Concentrating on his fingers, savoring their screams as the splinters dug deeper, he made his way further. That is the unrevised draft of the next piece of the adventure. So, all right, well, so today we have the privilege of getting to know YA fantasy author R.K. Ryals. R.K. is the author of emotional and gripping young adult and new adult paranormal romance, contemporary romance, and fantasy. With a strong passion for charity and literacy, she works as a full-time writer, encouraging people to share the love of reading one book at a time. An avid animal lover and self-proclaimed coffeeholic, she and I share a lot in common, I have to say. R.K. was born in Jackson, Mississippi, and makes her home in the southern U.S. with her husband, 3 daughters, a rescue dog named Oscar the Grouch, her bull mastiff, Luther von Kestrel, and a coffee pot she honestly couldn't live without. She says, I tend to wonder if she's named that too. Should she ever become the owner of a fire-breathing dragon? Tame, of course, she says. Her life would be complete. R.K. is also an active advocate for autism, poverty, anti-bullying, and literacy. Please join me in welcoming R.K. Ryals.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here.
It is great to see you today. Very good to see you. Okay, you're going to be reading from your YA fantasy novel, Mark of the Mage, which is book 1 in the Scribes of Medesia series. So that we can get a feel for the book, would you share a brief synopsis with us?
Books never die, but they can be forbidden. Medesia is a country in turmoil ruled by a bloodthirsty king who has outlawed the use of magic and anything pertaining to knowledge. Magery and scribery are forbidden. All who practice are marked with a tattoo branded onto their wrists, their futures precarious. 16-year-old Drastana Constamaria lives secluded, spending her spare time in the archives of her father's manor, surrounded by scribes. She wants nothing more than to become one of them, but when the scribes are royally disbanded, she is thrust into a harsh world where the marked must survive or die.
You've also picked your favorite quote. If you would tell us what it is and then explain why it's a favorite.
It is an Oscar Wilde quote, and it's, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." And it's my favorite quote because I think by saying that we are all in the gutter, we all have some kind of obstacle in our lives or something we're battling internally. And I think it's not about getting through those obstacles, it's about the way we look at them, about how we can get past them and how we can survive past them. And sometimes that just means looking at the stars or looking at the greener side of life, at the grass that's growing on the other side, and just reaching for that. And I think Oscar Wilde kind of put that in a great way because we all fight something. And I know I've definitely been through that in the past. So it's nice to think that there are different ways to look at stuff and look at it in a positive, optimistic light. I have a lot of friends who tell me all the time that I'm an over-optimist, but I think that's why I like the quote so much.
You're also going to be giving away a book or two. What will you be giving away?
I am going to be giving away 2 signed paperback copies of Mark of the Mage, and it's going to be open internationally. So I'm very excited about that.
Awesome. So do you hear that, everybody? So paperbacks internationally. Woohoo! We can all be excited about that. So make sure to enter to win in the comment section right below. You leave a brief comment about the episode. It can be anything. So just make sure when you leave your comment, you also leave a Twitter handle, a Facebook address, or an email address, so that if you are one of the 2 lucky winners, we can be sure to get a hold of you. Okay, so then the part we've all been waiting for, the reading. Yes. Woo! Okay, so this book sounds awesome. So RK is going to be reading from, as I mentioned, it's her YA fantasy novel, Mark of the Mage, which is book 1 in the Scribes of Medesia series. So, RK, would you briefly set up the portion you're going to be reading from, and then go ahead and share with us?
It's actually not too far from the beginning of the book, and Drastana, who is called Stone most through the book, that's her nickname, she has been living in this manor, sort of secluded with her father, and she's not really had to deal with the terrible side of what's going on in the kingdom quite yet. But she has just learned that the Scribes have been disbanded, and her stepmother wants her to marry in the capital because it will keep their family safe, because she's been practicing scribery up to this point, which has just been outlawed. And they're on their way to the capital of the kingdom, and the carriage gets stopped. And that's the part that I'm reading. And she's traveling with her family and her companion is pretty much the woman who raised her, because her mother is gone, and she actually doesn't know too much about her mother, and that kind of plays later on in the book. So, cool. And so I'm going to be reading right when the carriage gets stopped. She was interrupted by a jolt. The carriage rocked as it halted, and I grabbed onto my seat. "Whoa there," a voice shouted. I glanced at Agnes, my eyes wide. Meredith sat up across from us, rubbing the back of her hand against her mouth. "What's this about?" she asked groggily. Agnes gripped the curtain over our window, moving it aside just enough to peer out of the opening, her eyes sharp. Meredith leaned forward, her breath ragged. "It's not rebels, is it?" After a moment, Agnes sagged in relief. "No," she breathed. "Something in the road, I think." Meredith scowled. "Damned nuisance." "Maybe," Agnes conceded, "but it's also a chance to stretch." She rapped on the door, and it was opened quickly by Jarvis. "May we alight?" Agnes asked. The boy inclined his head, moving aside to offer his hand for support. We nodded at him as we stepped from the carriage. Meredith refused to move. Instead, she placed her legs on the seat we vacated, lounging unladylike in the privacy of our coach. "What's amiss?" I asked. The ground under my slippers was spongy and damp. It had drizzled off and on since we left Forticry. It was getting dark now, filling the forest with eerie shadows. Mist lifted from the warm ground, swirling around the bases of dark, thick trees. Crickets and frogs heralded the night, and there was the distinct smell of rotted vegetation. Bloodthirsty insects landed quickly on bare skin, sucked greedily, and then flew away. "Are we stuck?" Agnes asked. Jarvis would not meet our gaze. It was then I noticed the silence, the way the soldiers were standing at attention along the carriages. I didn't recognize any of their faces. My father's men were forced against the conveyances, their expressions hard, their eyes downcast. Agnes gripped my arm. "I should have known," she hissed before looking down at me, her eyes desperate and hard. "Get back in the carriage, Stone." An older man stepped forward. He had black hair streaked with white, and he wore chainmail with a red belted surcoat. Emblazoned along the front was an image of a howling black wolf and 2 crossed swords, the king's soldiers. A carriage door stood open behind the man. My stepmother rested against the space, a lantern held high, her eyes narrowed and her mouth twisted into a cruel smile. My father was behind her, his face gray in the shadows thrown off by the lamp. His mouth was gagged, his hands tied behind his back. I cried out as Agnes pushed me backward. The soggy ground was unforgiving, and I slipped, one hand sinking into the dirt as I caught myself. "Agnes Frill Gaffney," the king's man said loudly, "you wear the mark of the mage. In the land of Medesia, sorcery has been outlawed. You have been accused of using your magic after succumbing to the mark. Do you confess this to be truth?" Silent tears were leaving tracks on my cheeks as my grip tightened on Agnes's hand. I cowered behind her, but Agnes stood tall, her head held high. Our carriage door had opened, and Meredith peered beyond it, her face pale. I confess nothing, Agnes answered. Confession mattered not. Any accusation meant death. She knew it. I knew it. Soldiers began moving in on us, and I pulled on Agnes desperately. We could run. Surely we could run. No! My wail was lost in the sound of stomping men, shouted orders, and ripping chainmail as Agnes gently pried my fingers away from her hand. Let me go, dear heart, she said, her voice calm. Only her eyes expressed any fear. No, I mouthed, the sound weak, desperate, shocked. Listen to the forest, she whispered. Her hand moved to my face and she swept her fingers over my damp cheeks as the soldiers seized her roughly. I tried grabbing for her as they dragged her backward, but I was shoved toward the ground, my fingers gripping soggy soil. The rotting scent from before was cloying now, it stank of death. Light a mage fire, the red-coated man ordered. I was screaming now, the sound shrill. The other men looked at their captain with wide eyes. And risk the trees? A young soldier asked. The older man's gaze moved to the private and the boy shifted uncomfortably. The trees will not burn. Light a fire. The captain's voice was low and commanding with a threatening undercurrent no one seemed willing to test. A hand was over my mouth and I looked up wildly only to find myself peering into Jarvis's youthful face. Quiet, miss. They'll only burn you as well, the boy whispered against my ear. Even at 13 turns, the boy was the same height as me and he was strong. I fought him desperately, but he didn't loosen his hold. You've always been nice to me, miss. Please, he begged. Agnes didn't struggle as they tied her hastily constructed pyre of wood. I screamed against Jarvis's hand, my head throbbing fiercely. They couldn't do this. They couldn't. By order of King Raymond, this woman has been accused of sorcery. The punishment is death. All present bear witness. Light the fire, the captain announced. Another red-coated soldier lifted a torch, saluting Igni, god of fire, before throwing it onto the pyre. Wood crackled as it lit, some of it sputtering, and I was suddenly hopeful. I pulled on Jarvis's hand. The wood is too wet. It's too wet, I whispered furiously. But Jarvis simply recovered my mouth before angling his head at the red-breasted captain. It was then I noticed the way the man's hands glowed as he held them toward the pyre. The man was a mage. The king's captain was a mage. I screamed again, and Jarvis held me. I kicked furiously, finally breaking free as the flames took hold, the wood near Agnes's feet beginning to smolder and pop. 2 soldiers caught me before I neared the fire, holding me back when I tried to throw myself at Agnes. Their fingers dug cruelly into the skin on my upper arms, but I barely noticed the pain. I wasn't even sure I was breathing. Each breath was a sob. My lungs burned. The edge of Agnes's dress caught fire, and I struggled against the men's hold. I wanted to shut my eyes, but couldn't. There was banging from a carriage behind me, and I twisted just long enough to see my father kicking at the walls of the coach where he was bound. I tried to move toward him, but the soldiers' grips were too strong, too unyielding. It was then Agnes screamed. For the rest of my life, I would remember that scream, the pain, the despair, the fury in her voice. The same emotions roiled through my veins. My screams met hers in the night, in the forest, where a mage fire was being controlled by a sorcerer. Screams, the smell of burning flesh. Those screams would haunt me forever. Those screams ripped through my heart. Those screams tore at my soul. Screaming, and then nothing. Nothing left except the putrid smell of death and the popping sound of flames. Someone sobbed. Someone yelled threats. Someone even scratched the faces of the soldiers. In the end, I'm pretty sure that someone was me.
Guest author last week, YA fantasy author Danielle Jensen, posed a trivia question for us.
My trivia question was from the Hunger Games, and the question was, what was Katniss's younger sister's name? And the answer, of course, is Prim. And I'm sure you all knew that.
Okay, you have a trivia question for us. What is it?
It's actually a riddle, and I'm going to give 2 hints. It's a fantasy novel, and it's a children's book, and it was one of the first fantasy books I ever read. And so I've come up with a book riddle to hopefully help readers be able to figure out what it is. So the riddle is, I am cozy and warm, but I am also frigid and cold. I am an entrance and an exit, a door between 2 worlds at war. What am I, and what book am I from?
Ooh, I really like that. That's cool. She made up her own trivia question. That's great. Okay, so this is not an easy question. You really have to think about this one. So make sure whatever you do, right over here, there is a red button that says subscribe. Make sure if you haven't yet subscribed to this YouTube channel that you click that button, because I think next episode when RK reveals the answer, you're definitely gonna want to be here for it. RK, are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners?
I would like to leave a personal message for my readers, and I have been doing this since 2011. I started as an independent author, and I've pretty much stayed on the same path, and I absolutely love it. And I want to say thank you to my readers, because they have been with me through everything, through the birth of my youngest child, through the death of my father, through so much. They pretty much carried me through my entire career. And I think they're the ones that gave me the strength to be stronger, not only in my writing, but in myself. And when I first published, I published as a paranormal romance author, and I've sort of branched out. And I have this thing with my writing. I always believe that when you write with a purpose. So there's some kind of symbolism or message or deep feeling or even personal connection about me in every book that I write. And I love when the readers catch that and they contact me about it. And my readers have been absolutely spectacular about that. So I want to thank them for that, because they have been absolutely 100% incredible and amazing. I have a modern fantasy called The Story of Awkward that came out a few years ago, and it was sort of an anti-bullying message. And the readers really took that torch up, and they have carried it, and it's been absolutely incredible. So that book's actually available for free, because it is a book that's near and dear to my heart, and it was inspired by bullying that I went through when I was younger. And all of the paperback proceeds go to Anti-Bullying Foundation. So my readers have just been incredible working with me on all of that kind of stuff, and so thank you to them. And if you do not follow me or you haven't read the books, then definitely find me online at www.authorrkryals.com. And you can also find me on pretty much any social media as RK Ryals. So.
Excellent. Okay, that's great. Good deal. And by the way, all you need to do if you want to get a hold of RK, in the show notes down below, just open that section up, and all the links to get to her website, Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff are right below, so you don't have to worry about trying to figure out where to find it. So, well, with that, we have reached the end of yet another episode. I hope you've enjoyed getting to know RK Ryals just a little bit. I'm LRW Lee, author of the Andy Smithson Epic Fantasy Adventure Series. And just a brief reminder, if you just recently started watching the show, the ebooks of both Power of the Air's Passion, which is the prequel, as well as Blast of the Dragon's Fury, which is book 1 in the Andy Smithson series. The ebooks are free for download on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Google Play. So if you haven't, please do avail yourself of that. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your continued support of this program, and I hope you'll join us next Monday.